everyone, it's Julie Murphy, and today we are going to do our second part of our runner, and it involves deleting, combining, and appliquing a built-in design in our machines. So let's get started. First we're going to go into Embroidery, and we're going to go into our second tab up here, and we're going to scroll down to number 14. And here are our birds that are built into our system, and I actually just want to do this one bird. So we're going to set it on the screen, and if we did it at this point, it would just embroider all of them. So let's select Edit, and this little flower with the black outline is our stamp key. And if we did it at this point, we could applique all three birds onto our fabric using this outline, just changing the distance, and we'd have a lovely applique. See this little flower down here? I want to save it into the Design Center. So we will select our Home button. It tells us it's going to delete the pattern, and we'll say OK. Now we will choose My Design Center. Once we're in the Design Center, we just go to our button that has the circle and the square, which is our Shapes button. And we locate the little flower that has the outline around it that was just like it was in the embroidery screen. And there are our birds. So we will select and say OK. And now we're in the Design Center with just the outline of our birds. And remember, I said I only want to do this one bird, but I actually want to take this one bird and duplicate it. But before we can do that, I need to erase the other two birds. So let's zoom in. I think that might be close enough, and we'll select our eraser. And I think for this, I'm going to actually use the large square. We'll just erase the other two birds and the rest of that branch. And to get the rest of this bird, we use our viewing window and slide our square up. And then we'll change our viewing window and slide it down. Because we're going to duplicate this bird, it is going to have the branch in between them. By the time you rejoin the two branches, they're going to be a little far apart, so I think I want to slide back just a bit. That looks pretty good to me. So if we're happy with that, we'll zoom back out. So now we have our single bird. And what we're going to do now is go into our line properties and choose the piece of paper. We want to do a single stitch. I'm going to assign it red just because it will help me keep everything sorted as we go through to embroider. So we'll say OK. And I am going to zoom in on my bird. And I'm going to slide my viewing box down. Now remember, we're in the line properties. We've changed the stitch. If we touch the screen now, we're going to just draw with the pencil. You can see that is illuminated in green. So to change, let me show you what happens if we do that. And that's not a big deal, but that's not the application that we're using right now. So we can just use our undo arrow. And we want to select the bucket of the line property area. Once we've selected that, we can touch anywhere on the bird, and it changes it to our single stitch in the red, and we're ready to move on to the next step. Let's zoom out, and let's go to Next. There's our bird showing us that we've got the single stitch. We're going to preview it. And I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to save it into the pocket of the Design Center. And we will set it now. Once we set it, it will now take us into the embroidery screen. And you might be wondering, well, why aren't you working with the flipping it and rotating it and duplicating it in the Design Center? The problem in the Design Center is we actually, with our machines right now, cannot actually duplicate and rotate the way we need to, and so we need to do this in the embroidery screen. So we'll say Edit. You'll see we have a red box around our bird. We'll choose our duplicate key, and now we have two birds. So all we do is drag the one away, and now we can use our mirror image, and we have an upside down bird. We will now rotate it 180 degrees by choosing 90 twice. And there we go. Now we have two birds. At this point, what I would like to do is actually join them by sliding this one down to meet up with the other one. So I'm going to zoom in. I really want to see what I'm doing, so I'm going to zoom in. And I'm pretty happy with that. So if we're happy, we'll say OK. We'll zoom back out. And I'd like to center my birds. First thing I want to do is check my hoop. I can actually see I have a hoop right here. And I see that my design is about 6.5 by 3.5. So I want to go into my note paper. And I want to make sure I have selected the 8 by 8 hoop. We can just scan through and see if there's a different hoop we might work with. We just don't want a hoop that's too big. So I'm happy with the 8 by 8, but now I want to center these birds within the hoop. So we have our button down here that allows us to combine. And you'll see we still only have a red box around the one bird. This button right here allows us to select both birds. And here is our center button. And now it is centered within our hoop. And we can say OK. At this point, we have our placement stitch all set to go. We've got both birds, they're joined up. So I'm going to save these into the embroidery section of our machine. So it's Memory and Pocket. It's tempting at this point to save it as another stamp since we have the birds where we would like to stitch them out. However, the next step is actually going to be a tack down stitch. We did our placement, and the tack down, what I would like to have is two different pieces of fabric with the birds looking at each other. And to do that, I actually need it to stop in between each bird and allow us to do that. We've saved it into the memory of embroidery. So the next thing we're going to do is leave the embroidery area and go into our design center. So now that we're back in the design center, we could go back into our stamps button, but that would take us back to the beginning. The bird that we actually assigned the stitch to, we had saved it into the pocket. So now we can retrieve it by using the pocket that has the blue arrow. So we choose the pocket, and there is our bird. So we will set it. Now let's zoom in. I want to show you something. We just move it down with our viewing window. The next step that we're going to do, I want to remove the branch so I can now do my tack down. I'll select my eraser. I'm going to choose the medium eraser. And so now we have a little opening there. I'll show you what we're going to do. We'll move our viewing window and our eraser. Now we have two openings, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more and bring that over to the right side of the screen. And what we're going to do now is go back into our line properties. We're going to choose our single stitch. And I'm not going to change the color because I actually want to see where I'm drawing in and keep it in black. So I'll say OK. And this time I definitely want the pencil because we're going to fill in these two spots. So let me move my viewing window just a smidge. So pencil in the line property area. That looks pretty good, except I know I doubled up a little bit, so I'm going to undo it. And don't worry if it's not exactly how you want it. I'm going to show you how we're going to fix that. Okay, so now we have two blobs. So we'll choose our eraser. We're going to choose the smallest square, and we're going to come in above or below it and just take out those extra stitches. The next thing we want to do is go back into our line property area, make sure it's a single stitch. Let's choose the red. We'll say OK. This time we'll choose our bucket of the line property, and we'll just now change those stitches so they're just like the rest of it. You can zoom back out, and he looks pretty good. Yes, he's outside of our box, but that's okay. I'm going to leave it like that because we're going to still go into our embroidery area and we'll move him up. So the next thing we're going to do is say next. We're going to do our straight stitch. We're going to preview it. And there is our bird. Before I set it, I want to save him into my pocket of the Design Center. And now I will set. It's telling us we're leaving the Design Center. And now we're back in embroidery. There's our red bird outside of our hoop. And in order to place him where I need him, I'm going to go into Edit, and I'm going to do two things. One, I want to duplicate him, and two, I want to put him where the other design is already centered in our hoop. Now remember, our first placement stitches are in red. For this one, I want to change him to a green. So there's the red, and I'm going to choose this green color right here. I'll say OK. And then I also want to duplicate him. So I've now got two green birds. And remember, I like to stop in between placements to allow me to use different fabrics. So the second bird, I'm going to change him to this blue color. So now I've got a green bird and a blue bird. So we'll say OK. This one, I know I want to mirror image. Remember, it turns it upside down, and then I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to pull him out of the way, and I'll say OK. Now we can add in the one that we've already saved as our placement stitch. There it is. So we will set him. So the reds are our placement. And now I want to zoom in so I can drag the green bird up on top of this one. And remember, I have to touch somewhere on him to get the red box around him. Let's zoom in a little bit more. He's almost there, and I want to use my movement keys by going into Edit and Move. The red box is around my green bird. So I'm happy with that. So I'll say OK. I need to grab my blue bird. I can touch anywhere up where he is. I can go ahead and drag him down. Then once I've got him in the approximate area of the placement stitch, I'll select Move. Actually, I'm going to zoom in and see the boxes around the blue. So I just used the movement keys to get the blue bird centered on top of the other bird. So I'm going to zoom back out, and let's go back into Edit. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, now wait a minute. So you have your red, let me show you with the thread colors. So now we have our green bird, our blue bird, but then our stitches are in the wrong order for doing our placement. It's not a problem because we actually want to save our two birds separate from the placement. So to do that, let me zoom back out. So to get rid of the birds that have the branches that are our placement, we'll just touch the branch and drag it out of the way and select Delete. And again, let's just touch the branch, drag that bird out of the way, and select Delete. Now we have our green and blue bird exactly where we want them. without the placement stitches below them. So we will save them to memory in the embroidery center. So we only have the box around the one bird. So we want to combine them. We have now a box around both birds, and now we're ready to make a stamp and go back to our design center. So there are both of our birds. We're going to save them into the stamp in the design center. And we're done with this right now in embroidery. So we'll choose our home button and say OK and go into the design center. And here's our shapes button and our stamp button. And there are our two birds. So we have our original import. We have the outline that we imported with the branch. And this time we have our closed birds as a stamp. So we'll say OK. And now we have both on the screen. You might be saying, well, wait a minute. What if I only want to have one bird in one stitch and the other bird in another stitch? Well, let's look at that. First thing we can do is zoom in. And what we can do is in our line property area, we choose the notepad. We choose our applique stitch. And we've used a green and a blue. So this time I think I'm going to use a pink. And we'll say OK. And remember, we don't want the pencil. We want the bucket. And I'm going to actually touch only one bird. You know what? I think I'm going to make that a darker color. So I'm going to assign it a deeper purple. Still a satin stitch. I'm going to go back in. And now I'm going to choose a different color. I think I'm going to do this dark purple. It's still a satin stitch. Now you can use candle wicking or a chain stitch. But for this purpose, our machines right now still do not give us the opportunity to do a blanket stitch or a different type of applique when we're in Design Center. But that's okay. Let me show you what we're going to do. So we've chosen the satin, the deep purple, the bucket of the line property, and now we're going to touch this bird. We're going to zoom back out, and we're going to go next. And you can see here we have the top one. It's kind of got a moving color going around it. It's the lighter purple satin stitch, and I want to change the width of the zigzag to 0.1, and I'll set that. I also want to increase the density to 110, and I'll set that. Now I don't want to hit preview because I still want to change this bird. So to do that, I use my select keys here. And now the bottom bird is selected. And I want to change the width to 0.1 and set it. Change the density to 110 and set it. And let's go ahead and preview both birds. And they look pretty good. I'm really happy with that. But before I go on, I want to save them to the pocket in the Design Center. And hit set, and it will take us to embroidery, and there they are. Now before we go any further, we want to save them in the memory of our embroidery center. So we'll save them in the pocket, and I'm ready to delete those because now what we're going to do is we're going to start retrieving and building our layers. So we have our placement stitch, and I will set it. And then we're going to add, go into our pocket, and find our green and blue bird right there, and we will set it. And notice how they put them right on top of the placement. So we have our placement stitches, we have our tack down stitches, and now we want to add our applique stitch. And there they are, and we will set them. And they're now all three right on top of each other. At this point, we could go ahead and stitch them out, but I'm going to actually save it one more time because I want to do one other thing. So we're going to say memory, save it in the pocket. And this time I actually want to build up an applique. I want to put a heart right here. So we will say add and go into our shapes button, which is number 4. Choose number 7, the heart. This is a single stitch design. So we will set that. And obviously that's not where I want the heart. So before I do anything, I'm going to drag it away. You can see it's done it in a black color. So I want to change the black thread. Let's use these 3 colors. So we're going to use a pink and say OK. And the heart is actually 2.5 by 3. So I want to now make it smaller. So go to Edit, Size, shrink it down as small as it'll go. It's 1.5 by 1.8. So we'll drag it up. And we are now going to rotate it. And get it right into the position that we're looking for. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that, so I'll say OK. At this point we have a placement stitch to begin an applique heart. So now what I can do, the red box is around the heart, we've made it the 1.8 by 1.5, I've made it the pink color, I'm going to duplicate it. So now I'm going to pull that away while I work with it. I'm going to change its color. So I made the other one a lighter pink. This one's going to be this kind of medium purple. We'll drag it back up on top of it. Let's zoom in and make sure we're getting it just right. That looks pretty good actually. So if we're happy with that, let me just move this over so we can see. If we are happy with that, we're ready to add the next design. So let's zoom back out. So we'll say add, we'll go back into number 4, we'll go back into number 7, and we can choose what other pattern we want to use as our actual applique stitch. In this case, I want to use number 12, which is a blanket stitch. So we'll say set. And there it is in the wrong spot. And again, whatever we add usually shows up last. So we're going to change the color. And we've done a pink, a medium purple, and now I'm going to do this kind of burgundy-ish color. So we'll say OK. Remember we have to shrink it down, so we'll say Edit, Size, make it smaller. And it's 1.5 by 1.8 just like the other one. We'll say OK. We are now going to rotate it 90 degrees. And we are going to drag it right up here on top of the other. Let's zoom in. You can see we're not quite where we want to be. We can now use our arrow keys. So that looks pretty good. We will zoom back out. We'll say OK. And now let's look at our colors for the entire design. So we've got our original red placement stitches. We have our green and our blue tack down birds. We have our purple applique bird. We have our deep purple or blue applique bird. We have our placement heart. We have our tack down heart. And we have our blanket stitch heart. And all of that looks great, so we'll say OK. And before we go any further, we want to save our combined design into the memory of our embroidery section, and we are ready to begin stitching. What we're going to do now is we're not going to change the screw of our hoop. All we're going to do is lift up and pop our top hoop and reposition where we think we'd like to have our birds located. I'll use my fabric as a placeholder so I can kind of get it centered in the hoop so I can get stitching. We just moved our pins out of the way. And as long as we have the same thickness all the way around, we should be able to just snap our hoop back into place. And we're ready to get stitching. All right, so now that we're back at our machine, we need to retrieve our design. So we'll go into the pocket, and there's our design, and we will set it. Now you'll notice that the red box is only around the heart. And remember how I have my fabric loaded on the machine right now, I need the entire design to go the other way. Well, the problem is right now if I go into edit and mirror image, it's only going to mirror image whatever has the red box around it. So to make it so it's all one design, I'm going to select the combine button down here. I'm going to select the red boxes. I'm going to say OK. Now there's still red boxes around everything, and you'll notice we don't have a mirror image button. What I do want to do now is actually select our combine button, and now you'll notice there's a red box around the entire design, and now I can rotate it. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees and another 90 degrees. And so now it is exactly where I need it so I can start stitching. I'll say OK. Now one more thing I would like to do is I would like to make sure I have the design in the position that I would like. See how I have my pieces of fabric on my runner? I need to scan those in to make sure I've got my birds placed exactly where I would like to have them. So back at the screen, the next thing I'm going to do is choose this button up here. It's the camera with the piece of fabric behind it, and I'm going to ask it to scan my fabric. And there is my fabric on the screen. You can see where my birds are, and obviously I'm not worried about where the heart is right now. I'm just trying to make sure I approximately have the birds where I would like them to be. So now I'm going to select my move button. I'm going to shift them up ever so slightly. And I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to remove the pieces of fabric and begin stitching. I am using the Schmetz Microtex Sharp 7010 needles. I'm using the Filtech polyester pre-round clear glide bobbins and Floriani thread. So we're all set, and first we're going to do our placement stitches. And there we go. Those are our final birds with the heart and the birds appliqued with our branch. And I hope you've enjoyed this video.